My name is Dan Fitzgerald. I am the partner in charge of the Greenwich office of Cummings & Lockwood, and it's my pleasure to speak to you this morning about domicile and residence planning. As a firm, we've never advocated for uprooting families solely based on tax planning, but as you all probably find, our clients have houses in multiple jurisdictions. They're living all over the map, so it's just about tweaking the client's lifestyle to make it clear where income tax should be due and where estate tax should be due. After all, the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld in the past the constitutionality of two states taxing the same income or the same assets in an estate if each state has the appropriate nexus with the taxpayer. So in the spirit of the recent elections, my goal today is to be your fact checker. There's a lot of myths about domicile and residence planning that are repeated at cocktail parties in Fairfield County. And clients and advisors are always looking for bright line rules, so I'm hoping to cut through some of that today and educate you all on what's true and false about domicile planning so your clients can achieve the appropriate state level taxation. So the first myth I want to dispel is that everyone is leaving Connecticut. This used to be true. From 2011 to 2020, we lost 22,000 residents per year. That's 242,000 people after an 11-year period. The pandemic clearly changed this. From July of 2020 to 2021, we had an addition of residents of 5,377. We had 652 individuals with the average income of $402,000 moved from New York City to Litchfield County. We had 5,863 individuals from New York City moved to Fairfield County with the average income of $219,000. So this migration has really switched Connecticut quite a bit. We've had a surplus in the budget for the first time in years. We've had Fairfield County real estate lawyers so busy they can't take new clients, and people were buying homes for cash and without inspection and sight unseen. So as our governor likes to say on the campaign trail, I don't want more taxes, but I don't mind more taxpayers. So I know the Whalers reference is a bit of a stretch since the Hartford Whalers left Connecticut in '97. But I'm a hockey fan, and I've been dying to get a Whalers reference into a presentation. Governor Lamont hopefully can use his new taxpayers to build a stadium and bring the Whalers back. Before I get into the law part of it, I wanted to quantify the actual tax savings that can be achieved by moving to a no-income, no-estate tax state. And this slide shows the various income tax brackets for married couple filing jointly in 2022 with no dependents. So think of that retired couple, kids have left the house and are off the payroll. So this is the annual tax savings, and in this day and age with high exemptions, this is the real savings by moving your domicile and residence to a no-tax state. The next slide shows the estate tax savings that can be achieved by dying. A state like Florida, where there's no estate tax. As Meg mentioned, the Connecticut exemption is currently $9.1 million, moving up to $12,920,000. This chart actually shows next year's exemptions and rates. When I gave this same presentation in 2016, this whole chart was red. Now it's almost all green. So Connecticut's really improved. While we still have the independent gift tax, like Meg said, we now have one of the highest exemptions and one of the lowest rates of the states that have a state estate tax. New York has actually become less attractive with respect to the estate tax. As Meg said, the exemption is $6,110,000. The rate is 16%. New York's estate tax has two really unattractive features. The dreaded feature is the New York estate tax cliff that hits some people that wouldn't be considered super wealthy. For 2022, that's for estates that fall between $6,110,000 and $6,711,000, which is 105% of the 2022 exemption. So for these people, their tax rate in that gap can exceed 100% the excess over the exemption. So for example, if someone dies with $6,160,000, they're $50,000 over the exemption. That would cause a New York estate tax of $126,000, which is 250% the excess over the exemption. This occurs because New York's exemption is not a true exemption. Once you're over that exemption, you really get taxed back down to $1 going up the rate scale. The second bad feature about New York is it recaptures gifts made within 3 years of death. This creates a mismatch between the federal and New York taxable estates. For bigger estates, this can cause some problems, especially on audit later on. So while zero tax in Florida certainly beats Connecticut or New York, Connecticut has really improved its position with respect to the estate tax compared to dying in New York. Everybody should groan when they see this slide, because Connecticut's probate court fee is still a different story. Statutory probate court fee is one of the highest in the country. It is due on all estates, even if you've done great planning and have completely avoided probate. The fee has been capped since 2016 at $40,000, but for anybody in the $9 million or less range, it essentially acts as a tax on the size of your estate. This is a single person with no surviving spouse. The fee schedule is actually reduced by 50% for amounts passing to a surviving spouse. And again, it cannot be avoided, even if you've done a good job of avoiding probate. The reason being is the probate court's review of the Connecticut estate tax return is deemed sufficient to justify the fee. So the most important thing you need to know for advising a client who's heading south or heading to another jurisdiction is the concepts of domicile and residence. And both residence and domicile matter for income tax purposes. Domicile and domicile alone matter for estate tax purposes. So who's subject to Connecticut income tax? I'm going to use the Connecticut rules, but Connecticut and New York are very similar. I'm going to flip back and forth between New York and Connecticut. Every state's law is a little different. So another myth there is that day counting is all that matters. That is not true. In states like Connecticut or New York, it is a two-part test. You are subject to income tax in Connecticut if you're domiciled in Connecticut, or you're not domiciled in Connecticut, but you are here 183 days, and you have a permanent place of abode here. So even if your client has moved to Florida, there's a risk that they're here too much. They might become a permanent place of abode. People run into this a lot where they get stuck here, helping with grandkids or something like that, and they inadvertently are surprised to find out they're subject to Connecticut income tax. What is domicile? Like I said, that matters for income and estate tax purposes. Domicile is this really murky standard where courts and tax authorities try to determine your intention to make a place a permanent home, where the center of your client's domestic, social, and civil life are. Domicile requires not only a physical presence, but this intention component where the taxpayer actively decides to make a state his new permanent home. Courts and tax authorities will look at various factors to determine the person's intent. They'll look at where their bills are mailed, although most people get electronic bills these days, where you go to church or synagogue, where you have your driver's license, where your cars are registered, where you go to the doctor, where your most valuable possessions are, if you keep the Picasso in Florida or you keep it in Connecticut, where you keep your bank accounts, where you donate to charity, and where you belong to social and athletic clubs. So this day and age, it's really a mixed bag. We have clients with stuff everywhere, electronic statements, really there's no physical address anymore sometimes for some clients. So it's our job and your job as advisors to help make that story as clear as can be. Make sure you send the financial statements to Florida. Don't send them to the Connecticut address. How does one go about changing their domicile? As I said, it requires both that physical presence and a required state of mind. So changing your domicile, the first step is the physical move, and then you got to document and evidence your intention to move. And so our firm, I'm sure many of you have seen it, have a 3-page checklist where you can kind of walk through all these steps. It includes filing an affidavit of domicile in a new state, securing a driver's license in a new state, registering cars in the new state, transferring your voter registration, using your new address when filing income tax returns, signing new wills and revocable trusts, citing that you're living there. If you're going to qualify for the homestead exemption in the new states, like Florida has a homestead exemption that protects the increase in your property taxes each year and protects you from certain creditors. And so make sure you qualify for all those. In the state you're leaving, you should be sure to cut ties to the extent possible and minimize your time in that state. You should surrender your driver's license, your license plates get removed from the voter list. Send a copy of your domicile declaration to your former state. Mark your last income tax return as final or start filing as a non-resident to the extent you're required to file. And again, change club memberships to non-resident status. Don't think they're going to give you a break on the dues, but it's worth trying. Another myth, and I hear it all the time, clients say, well, how are they going to find out? There's no way they're going to find out. I'm very confident they're going to find out, right? And this is just a list of things that we see, the first things tax authorities ask for in these sort of audits. And electronic records are going to give you away. The credit cards, the cell phone towers, The Easy Pass records are just going to give away your location and make a very clear picture. That being said, we've had success in the past defending a tax audit, a state tax domicile audit, where the client that died lived in Florida, but his daughter was using the credit card here a lot. So we had to justify that and have a little affidavit signed by the daughter saying that it was her using the credit card. As I said, most people get tripped up on the income tax side by inadvertently becoming statutory residents. So this means the client's clearly domiciled in Florida or another state, but they retain a home in Connecticut, they use it seasonally or when they visit relatives. And so how do you count your days? For those concerned about becoming statutory residents, it's important to keep a day calendar. You must count any part of a day present in the state. New York audit guidelines go as far as to say any day you step foot in New York is a day in New York. This means anytime a client goes to dinner for New York City, goes to see a Broadway show, that would be a day in New York. New York has two very limited statutory exceptions. One, if you travel to a New York airport to travel out of state, that's not a day. If you're in New York and you get hospitalized and you're stuck in New York, those are not days. Connecticut has the same rule for transportation, but not the medical exemption. So what do we tell clients to do? Is keep a good day calendar. Like everything else in the world, there are apps for this. I've named a couple, TaxBird, TaxDay, Moneo. I didn't get any commissions for this. But it's good to keep a good record, and these things will be asked for if the client's audited. For statutory residents, it's a two-part test. You have to have a permanent place of abode. This is really any home or permanent place or structure that is suitable for year-round use, even if it's not used year-round. In New York, we know it must be more than a mere camp or cottage, and it can include leases as well as owned property. So this is not a myth. New York loves to catch non-residents who work in New York City. And so the common fact pattern is a family is clearly domiciled in Connecticut or New Jersey. One or both parents work in Manhattan, and then they keep a vacation home in the Adirondacks, the Hamptons, Catskills, wherever in New York. And so New York's goal here is they're already getting the W-2 income, but they normally want the investment income, capital gains, interest on dividends. And so we've had two really similar cases that had different outcomes over the last few years, one I've talked about before at this seminar. So we'll start with the Barkers. They were New Canaan residents. There was no question they were domiciled in Connecticut. The husband worked in Manhattan at one of the large banks. He had a significant investment portfolio with a capital gain event. They owned a small cottage in the Hamptons. The couple spent 19 days there in 2002, 16 days in 2003, and 18 days in 2004. The wife's parents actually used the house more than they did, but that was enough objectively for the New York Tax Appeals Tribunal to say that they were statutory residents because they had a permanent place of abode available to them that they did not use, but it was available to them, and they were considered statutory residents in those years. So this year, we got the Obis decision, similar facts, New Jersey residents, maybe the court's coming to its senses. They had a vacation home in the Adirondacks. The husband worked in Manhattan, so he met the day count requirement easily. But they argued the permanent place of abode up in the Adirondacks was just a ski house. They only used it 3 weeks a year. When they went there, they brought their stuff. When they left, they took their stuff home. They did not use it any other time of the year. They obviously maintained it, though. And the court held here that you can't rely on the objective facts alone. You must look at the subjective facts as to whether the taxpayer actually used the permanent place of abode. So here the Obis family was not held to be statutory residents, which hopefully signals that New York's getting a little looser on this standard. Finally, the last myth, another common myth, there's going to be some sort of COVID exception to income tax rules. Not going to happen. I think a lot of people thought they were working from home in Connecticut, not going into Manhattan, they wouldn't have to pay New York City or New York State tax. Fortunately, it's not true. New York, Connecticut, Delaware, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania all use the convenience of the employer rule, which means that if the employee's office is in that jurisdiction, then the employee's income gets taxed locally, even if they never step foot in that office. Several states are considering challenging these rules, but it will take a while to work through courts. Thank you.